a little bit about relationships and how to talk to people, really. So I found that talking to a lot of college students and people in general, if you're talking about a fight you have with boyfriend, girlfriend, mom, dad, you know how to talk to each other. So if I were to say, you know, I came home at 3 in the morning and my mom was really mad at me and I just said, chill, you're being crazy. I think that everyone in the room would know that's a really bad way to handle a disagreement. But all the time on TV we see people saying, you're just crazy, you don't know what you're talking about, you need to calm down, and being really dismissive. So what we're going to do today is apply some relationship techniques to common ground in political and other realms. So we're going to look at Gottman's Love Lab, which is a pretty popular study, so I'm sure some of you have heard of it. But basically, Gottman looked at several different couples talking to each other in a lab. And after he watched them interact with each other and talk about different issues, and he looked for things like what their pulse was doing, how jittery they were. He had things that would test their skin conductivity, but he also looked at like eye rolling, sneering, facial expressions, tone of voice. And he coded all of this. And after he coded it, he was able to predict with 94% accuracy which relationships were going to fail. So, from that study, he came up with the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which basically is, if this was present in their conversation, it's not a good sign. Things are not going to go well for these people. So the first one was criticism, which means, you know, attacking a partner's character or personality, which is a lot of what, you know, Joe and Nathan and Lizzie talked about today. There's contempt, which included name-calling, hostile humor, mockery, bad body language, so arms crossed, eye-rolling, sneering at people, defensiveness, which is taking the position of the victim, whining, blaming. You just repeat your own argument over and over and over again without listening to what anyone else is saying. And then stonewalling, which is just a shutdown. So, you know, silent treatment, one-word answers where you're not really paying attention to them, and stony silences. So if any of these 4 things were present, you know, the more that they showed up, the more likely it was that this relationship was not going to last. So here's my first example. It's from The Daily Show, so keep that in mind. I'm going to play you a clip, but just from this picture alone, you can see that her body language is not positive. I don't know how well you can see the picture. Her arms are crossed, her legs are crossed, her arms are folded, she's leaning back. He has a megaphone, he's clearly yelling at her. So we're going to watch this and see, because I mean, this is something, ooh, got away from me. Something that a lot of people watch. A lot of people in our culture are exposed to things like this every day. So he is talking to, Jason Jones, talking to a Republican strategist about the Affordable Care Act. And she just keeps sitting there, arms crossed, looking at him. You have to defund Obamacare, we're not going to start the government. It's during the shutdown. She's like, that's the only way we're going to get this to work. Defund Obamacare. So he'll ask her a long question. She's like, nope, you just have to defund Obamacare. So then he stops the conversation and says, why are we doing this? We know how this is going to go. You're going to say something stupid. And so she responds with, well, your law is stupid. And he said, and then I'm going to say something rude back, like, yeah, sure, affordable health care for millions is stupid. So there he is mocking her. She's not listening to him. Neither side is good in this situation. I'm not holding up one as the example. These are both examples of poor communication. So then he goes to a hostage negotiator and tries to learn techniques of how to talk to someone who you disagree with. And he tells him things like, well, you have to stop being condescending. Like, that's clearly not working for you. And, you know, he's a Daily Show correspondent, so he's kind of pouting about it. He's like, well, how can I stop being condescending if she's being stupid? Like, that's your problem. You can't sit there and call her stupid or it's not going to work out for you. So, I mean, the whole thing is he comes back with, like, a bulletproof vest and a megaphone, starts yelling at her, and they reach no conclusion. Because pretty much every one of those 4 horsemen is present in that conversation. He's mocking her, he's insulting her. She's not listening to what he's saying. They both have terrible body language where their arms are crossed, leaning back. He's eventually yelling at her. She stops answering his questions at some point, so stonewalling. And these are the kind of conversations that we see. I mean, The Daily Show's on every single night, and it's not just that show. It's a lot of interviews that we see on news shows involve contentious conversation. And if you take relationship advice, you can apply it right to that. You know, you're not going to get anywhere if you're yelling at someone, if you have a bad tone of voice. Every single sign of a relationship apocalypse also can point to a conversation in a political sphere that's not going to work. it's not going to be fruitful. No one came to any consensus after that. She didn't leave thinking, oh, he's right. If he just, all he needed to do was yell at me with that megaphone, and now I understand why he wants the Affordable Health Care Act to go through. And he didn't leave that conversation thinking like, oh, she just repeated Obamacare's stupid over and over again, and now suddenly I understand Obamacare's stupid. Neither of them left with any different opinion, and they both probably left disliking the other side even more. So,
I had to turn it off.
Is it just done?
I'm restarting it.
Okay. Okay. So the next example I had to show you guys was from the Sebelius congressional hearings, where she was put in front of Congress to testify about the Affordable Health Care Act. And this one was interesting to me too, because both sides were leaving this thinking that they had succeeded and done well. So the video I had was posted to a Republican congresswoman. She posted the video, and it was of her grilling Sebelius on one specific aspect of it. And what I wanted to show it to you was the Republican was repeating her own self over and over and over and over again, kind of trying to get Sebelius to admit fault. And Sebelius was sitting there rolling her eyes, leaning back in her chair, not caring at all what this woman was saying. So the congresswoman posted this, like, look at how well I interrogated her for her wrongdoing. And then there were also articles following Sebelius. One that I want to show you is called 9 Types of Shade Sebelius Threw During the Congressional Hearings. I don't know if you guys know what throwing shade is, but if you look it up on Urban Dictionary, it's like hateful or making fun of someone who's acting a fool. So basically it was praising Sebelius because these congresspeople were idiots, so like, good for you for rolling your eyes. And so both sides were kind of like, look at how I put her on trial, look at how I ignored what they were saying to me. Neither side was leaving that conversation, moving forward with the problems in the website, with problems on the exchange. Nothing productive was happening in those conversations. And again, there was eye rolling, there was sneering, there was contempt. There was name calling, there was blaming, stonewalling, where she would just lean back in her chair and not answer at all. So if you had just put these people in a marriage counselor and talk through your issues here, there could have been a more productive conversation that happened if either side was willing to treat the other person like we would in any everyday relationship. These are not difficult things to do. You do it every day, whether you're fighting with your parents, girlfriend, boyfriend, like I said earlier. We all know how to do these things. It's just easier when there are popular shows praising mockery and insulting and silly tactics and yelling. And then there's also, it's what we see in Congress, where two really high-up officials in our government are sitting there smearing at each other. And then everyone's going back to their own side and saying, look at how funny it was, what they did. It becomes really easy to slip into those when they're reinforced. And then the final clip I had to show you guys was where we go to find all of the good things about politics. It was from the West Wing. This was an example of what can happen if you... Why I like this one is because it started off, it's children in the White House, and the aides are blowing them off, they're just kids. And what the kids really want to talk about is abolishing the voting age. They think it's an unfair restriction to place on voting because things like the environmental issues, Social Security, are all going to affect these children someday, and they have no say over it now. So they got blown off by White House aides repeatedly, and then finally one of them sat down with the children and listened to their argument. And I think it's a really good example of all the common ground tactics we talked about, but also what can happen if you just sit at the table and are present, like Lizzie said, and listen. What I like about that is when he sits down at the table, one of the things he does is repeats the argument the kids are making back to them to make sure that they have, and then he understands them and then elaborates on their point. And my favorite part about that is that at the end of the conversation, he doesn't say to the kids, yes, you convinced me, you're 100% right, let's abolish the voting age. He says, you've convinced me that this is an issue. Here's a way we can maybe start on this. So reduce it in increments, not start at the federal level. He heard what they were saying. He didn't give up what he thought was right or what he felt was right, but was able to kind of meet them in the middle and find some common ground with them there. And I like that because after the blow-off, when he sat down over food, like Lizzie was saying, is a great place to have a conversation, to really sit down and hear what someone's trying to say to you. So Gottman in his Love Lab kind of came up with remedies to the 4 Horsemen. So he found that couples were successful when they made specific complaints and requests. So there's no general, you're always wrong. This is always a bad idea. You have to kind of lay out, there was this time when you did this, I didn't like it. How do we move forward with this specific issue? Because when you stay specific on an issue, it's harder to attack, ambiguous qualities about a person or their character. Gottman also recommended conscious communication, which means speaking, in facts and listening generously, as he put it. So not just sitting there and hearing the words that they're saying, but trying to understand, as Nathan was talking about, the underlying reason why they didn't want students in the room. The underlying values that are supporting their beliefs. Validate your partner. So you can't just sit there and, in the daily show that you guys didn't see and say, this is a stupid law, you're a stupid person. There are clearly some issues with the law, and there are clearly some good things about it. So maybe validate what the person is saying when they're making a point to you, and then counter it with fact, or counter it with something specific, so you're not just countering at the person. Claiming responsibility was a big one for Gottman, which is, what can I learn from this? What can I do about it? How can I improve things for you? How can I improve things for me? So not everything is one partner's fault. Not everything is one political party's fault. Not everything is one ideological standpoint's fault. There's responsibility and value to be claimed on both sides of any argument. And the last one was practice getting undefended, which means if you're on the defensive, it makes you more likely to attack. So when someone says something, even if it's a criticism of your belief, it's not a criticism of you. And if you take it as such, you're more likely to lash back at your partner and then slip into these unproductive conversations. So one of his main remedies to the Horsemen of the Apocalypse is just practice taking that deep breath, thinking about what they're really saying. Don't feel like they're attacking you, and then come back with your counter. So those are the common ground lessons from the Love